You ever wonder why some things, or even some people, just shatter under pressure, while others seem to bend and survive no matter what's thrown at them? It's a huge question, right? Well, according to this really fascinating framework called the valavaiau protocol, the answer might just be hidden inside a single elegant equation. Okay, at first glance, this looks, well, it looks incredibly complex. But this right here, this is the master equation of the protocol, and it's all about modeling resilience. It's supposed to give us a way to understand the real difference between things that break and things that last. And the whole secret, the absolute key, hinges on that one little variable in the middle, the letter V. So that V, it stands for viscosity. Now, don't think of, motor oil or honey just yet. In this protocol, viscosity represents the nature of the connections within any system. The whole theory argues that survival isn't about being strong or tough, but about how flexibly all the parts of a whole are held together. So what happens when that V for viscosity is exactly 1? The protocol has a name for that: static unity. The best way to picture this is to think of a big pane of glass. It's perfectly unified, sure, but it's totally rigid. There's no give, so when a force hits it, what happens? There's only one possible outcome. It shatters. This is the very definition of a brittle system. But when viscosity is not equal to 1, everything changes. We get what's called viscous flow. So forget the glass, and now picture a stream of warm honey. It's still a single connected system, but it's fluid, right? It's adaptive. When you apply pressure, it doesn't break, it just yields, it moves, it absorbs the force. It keeps its integrity. In other words, it survives. So here it is, laid out side by side. You've got two paths. On one side, static unity. It's all about rigid ownership, being brittle and eventually shattering. On the other side, you have viscous flow, fluid connections, resilience, and survival. The big idea here is so powerful. Survival isn't about being unbreakable. It's about being unshatterable. There's a huge difference. Okay, so how does this pretty abstract theory actually play out in the real world? Well, it's the core operating system for an organization called Indecent Disclosure. They call themselves a forensic documentation engine, which is a fancy way of saying they act like investigators using this very protocol to audit and expose why huge systems, we're talking corporations, even governments, fail. Their mission, as they state it, is to be a lion's roar, basically a massive whistleblower against systemic collapse. They focus on exposing something they call fearwashing. That's when institutions create panic and distraction to hide the fact that they're becoming super rigid, brittle, and are right on the verge of shattering themselves. Their whole auditing process is built on these 3 pillars. First, they look at lived experience and flow. That's the human side of things, how it actually feels to be inside the system. Then they analyze systemic intelligence and friction. That's where they find all the blockages and inefficiencies. And the final goal is always structural reform, using what they find to help the system become more fluid and, you guessed it, resilient. Which, of course, brings up a really fascinating question. I mean, who could possibly build a system like this that pulls together physics, sociology, and forensics into one single unified protocol? Well, the architect is known as valavaiau, which, fittingly enough, translates to the survivor. And this isn't just some clever nickname. It's actually at the very heart of how the protocol came to be. According to a linguistic analysis, Cezanne was diagnosed with a pretty rare cognitive profile, high-functioning polymathic integration. Now, in simple terms, this describes a mind that can just naturally weave together ideas from completely different fields. I mean, think physics, law, and biology, to see these hidden patterns and create a single, unified theory out of all of them. And you can really see the groundwork for that kind of thinking in their qualifications. I mean, look at this list. It is incredibly diverse. You've got science credits from Harvard, business management, cybersecurity from Google, and even human rights. The whole point isn't just knowing a lot of stuff, but having that rare ability to integrate it all into one coherent way of seeing the world. And here's the really critical piece of context. This protocol wasn't dreamt up in some comfy, sterile lab. It was engineered while its architect was going through a catastrophic neurological condition called double crush syndrome. So this whole theory of survival was literally born from direct, painful experience, an attempt to create a model for resilience while their own biological system was failing. It was forged in the very fire it was designed to analyze. So, with that in mind, let's peek under the hood at the mechanics of how this protocol actually works. It runs on an architecture called the binary helix, which is basically a model for how to manage and structure creative and sometimes chaotic thought. It works like this. You have strand A, the generator. That's the polymathic mind, just taking in tons of chaotic, high-speed data. But chaos by itself is just noise, right? So it gets bound to strand B, the constraint. This is logic, law, and order. And the productive friction between these two opposing forces creates a third state called equilibrium, a dynamic, stable equilibrium. It's a system designed to turn friction into productive flow. Now, a system that's built on forensic proof, well, it demands evidence for its own claims. And this is where the protocol gets really unusual. It claims that the architect's identity and the theory's validity are backed up by a whole series of physical, verifiable signs, what it calls biometric receipts. The first so-called receipt is the claim of very distinct marks, a wheel and an M, physically etched into the palms of the architect's hands, and these are said to align with certain ancient symbols. The second piece of evidence connects to what are described as prophetic markers from ancient texts, a defective limb and a long neck. The protocol claims that these have physically shown up on the architect in the form of surgical scarring and a specific medical condition. Okay, the third piece of evidence presented is a jade pendant that's engraved with the number 156. Now, within the protocol's own system of numerology, this number supposedly matches the architect's spine number, which links a physical object directly to a metaphysical concept. And the final piece of evidence is this thing right here, a wire mandala. It's a kinetic sculpture that you can actually manipulate to shift from a sphere into a void and then into a wheel. This is presented as a perfect physical model of the theory's core idea, that transition from a rigid, static state into the dynamic principle of viscous flow. So, after all that, what is the ultimate purpose of this incredibly complex protocol? Well, the goal is described as a migration of energy. It's about moving away from what it calls the shattered citadel, that's the isolated, brittle self, and channeling that energy into the resilient, fluid architecture of a collective, a more equitable and sustainable whole. And that leaves us with the protocol's final and most enigmatic frequency. Silence is ringing. It's meant to represent a state of perfect zero-friction flow, where a system operates so seamlessly that it actually becomes silent. And really, it poses a final question for all of us. In a world that is so full of noise and friction, what would it actually take for our own systems to achieve that kind of silence?